Welcome everybody to the Solo Adventurer with me, Christian Schiller. The Solo Adventurer, every week, it's sort of alternating at the moment. I either try a solo adventure game, roleplay game, interactive fiction, those sorts of things. It's a bit loose. And every other week I try a kind of gaming related digital tool. This week is the turn of a game. And we'll come to what that game is in a minute. But if you enjoy what you see, you can find more at christianschiller.com or wherever you are watching this stream. Say hi. If you're listening to the edited version later, say hi somehow. And subscribe, etc., etc. All the usual streamer stuff. I am looking at a piece of interactive fiction called Grievance by an author called Will, Whill, on Itch. Itch and Twitch, it's very confusing. Itch is where I find a lot of these. It's called Grievance, an interactive story about the nature of power. Seemed appropriate for the day at the moment, unfortunately. It is Pay What You Feel. You can see here an interactive story about power, the limits of power, its corrosive nature, and the damage that power inflicts. Deliberate or otherwise, and all of those without it. Yeah. It's updated. I think the last time was about a year ago, actually almost exactly a year ago. You can download it, or you can also play it here. I downloaded it and I have it running locally. Strangely, it's written in some software called Ink, which I'd not heard of before, but I've now added to the list of tools to try. So I look forward to that. Also, will not let me increase font size, strangely. So I hope this ends up being large enough. So let's begin, I reckon. Grievance, the capital city of Iramel. Mud sloshed beneath Thera's boots as she walked toward the towering doors of the royal castle. Mutters of exasperation came from the long line behind her. The light, constant rain seemed to have dampened the entire city's mood, and the townsfolk didn't take too kindly to a strange woman cutting the line. If this woman wanted an audience with the king, she should have to wait like everybody else. The resentment exuding from the throng of citizens bounced off of Sarah's heavy, hooded cloak. She walked on. When she reached a gate, a member of the royal guard stepped forward. His armor was accented with thin lines of gold, hinting at his officer status. That's far enough. End of the line is over there. The man gestured in the direction of the growing line of people waiting for their audience. Sarah scowled underneath her hood. Threaten or ignore? What does ignore mean, though? Does it mean ignore and go to the end of the line, or just ignore and keep going? I think we'll ignore. Sarah scowled underneath her hood. Hello, Hiram. Hiram's eyes widened. General, you're not... He cut himself off as Sarah stormed past him and into the castle. Hiram stood outside the gate. Stunned, he looked to the raining sky and uttered a curse. Then he ran in after her. Sarah's anger rose with each step closer to the throne room. She had been stripped of what belonged to her. She would have it back, or there would be hell to pay. When Sarah reached the gilded door to the throne room, she didn't hesitate. She burst into the room with her anger boiling. The numerous advisors and scribes turned at her loud arrival. Some gasped, others whispered feverishly amongst themselves. Finally, one of the king's men pointed out the hooded intruder to the busy king. Stop! The king boomed as he rose from his throne. Sarah stopped her march towards him and stood fuming. I've come for my army and my rank, she responded bitterly. In a single motion, she reached for her cowl and lowered her hood. Greet or demand? Let's demand, why not? I want what's mine, father. Grievance by Walter Hill. The Old Farmer. Interesting. The capital city of Iramel a day earlier. Cole lowered himself on his pack horse, stretched, and took a look at the city signpost. He'd arrived outside of Iramel, and horse riding was not permitted on entry into the capital. He led his horse towards the city walls. One of the guards approached him and held up a hand. State your business. What brings you to the capital city? I have come to the city for orders with the king. Sir, I have been on the road. Another damn checkpoint. I'm going to go for another damn checkpoint. I feel like belligerence seems to be working for me so far. Another damn checkpoint? This is what my doomers pay for me. For 10 men to accost me along the road, and then for another to make even more demands from the safety of the precious capital. Sir, we are in wartime. The king has deemed the extra security essential to rooting out southern dissidents. So you have two options here. There's quite a lot of text here, so I'm just going to summarize. We're basically saying the king is weak, or the king is kind of taking advantage of the situation. I think I'm going to go for that one. So this is the same king who's thrown my town into famine. The king who's deemed it appropriate to demand all of my crops for a pittance in the name of wartime. You'll have to forgive me if I don't agree with the man who's bleeding my farm and my town dry. You'll have to take up your gripes with him, old man. I just do what I'm told. And between you and me, the war isn't going well. That's so, or can't say I'm surprised. Can't say I'm surprised. You'd best watch your tongue, old man. My brother is risking his damn neck to keep you lot fat and happy. Your brother serves a king and a court that doesn't give a damn about me. So don't tell me how good life is, because back home, you have no idea. I've had quite enough of this interrogation. Cole reached the gold moleskin and stabled his horse for the evening. He had been travelling for days, and at his age, treks of any length took a toll. Cole had an early night, certain that he would require all the energy he could muster for his audience with King Aaron. ... Cole woke the next day at dawn and ate a sparse breakfast of cheese and bread. When he arrived at the castle gates, the line had begun to stretch into the nearby square. His well-worn boots became slick as the rain turned the well-trod dirt to mud. He stood in line for what felt like hours. It didn't help matters when a tall, hooded woman decided to ignore the line and just stroll right into the castle. The guards spent a dozen minutes or so trying to placate the disgruntled citizens that dutifully waited for their audience with the king. Finally, it was Cole's turn to bring his concerns before the king. Cole was let into the castle. Outside of the vaulted door to the throne room, Cole was stopped by an advisor. What is the concern of your audience? The advisor asked, looking down over his glasses. So, we can try to be nice, or we can try to be blunt. I think we're going to continue down the blunt path. I demand to speak with my king to resolve the famine and poverty this war has brought on my home. The advisor stared at Cole for a moment, his lips pursed. Very well, you may enter. Cole nodded and pushed open the door to the throne room. Cole's eyes locked on the king, and he began to make his way towards the throne. The king was speaking with an advisor in a low voice. Ensure that she does not go gallivanting around my castle. He is to be confined to old quarters. The advisor nodded quickly and scurried off. Cole let the conversation float away from him. He had more pressing issues. Kneel, state request, or accuse. I think we're going to go middle ground this time. State request. I have come to discuss the plight of farmers from the Lestera Valley. What could ail your people that does not ail us all? We are in wartime, you realize. I'm well aware, and that is why you must help us. Without our food, your armies would be weak and starving. The king frowned. What are you requesting? Pay us more. How are we to survive? I feel like asking for more money is not necessarily a solution because there's probably a lack of money. So that's kind of the same response. How are we to survive without more money? You must pay us more. The king sighed. If only it was so simple. I will see what can be done. Thank you. Cole bit his tongue. He had so much more to say, and by the time he was outside of the castle walls, he was seething. He feared he would be ignored and left empty-handed. There was nothing he could do now but hope the king might come to his senses and act. But in his heart, Cole knew he had lost. The war would continue, and it would sap him and his farm of all they had left. Cole could feel his age at that moment. He could feel the calluses knotting his hands from years of work, and the hint of sweat that always lurked as if his body knew there was always work to be done. But Cole had survived one war, and he would not succumb to another. He began to walk back to the gold moleskin, defeated but unbowed. The gold moleskin. Evening. After freshening up, Cole made his way to the tavern's kitchen for a meal. Going out into the town seemed like a bad idea after the events of the day. Cole stood at the entrance to the kitchen for a moment, taking in the area with a glance. Look around or sit. The kitchen was light on decorations. A few paintings hung depicting rustic and romantic valley landscapes. Cole stood at the entrance to the kitchen for a moment, taking in the area with a glance. Well, I've already looked around, so I guess I have to sit. Cole found an open seat at the small bar. He nodded with curiosity at the soldier sitting next to him. The king's crest was etched into the back of the man's leather battle vest. This didn't seem like a place a royal guardsman would frequent. I could feel you staring. I'm not a guardsman. Not anymore. The knight shook his head as he stared into his mug of ale. How's the ale? The knight shook his head. Not good enough. I'll make sure to avoid buying that then, Cole chuckled. He motioned to one of the boys tending the tables. I'll have an ale and the hottest soup you've got. The boy nodded and hurried to the back. You ever lose everything all at once? Never all at once, but I'm familiar with loss, certainly. It's hard. I've lost seasons' worth of crops in the best of years. So, we're all in the same boat then? I say nothing. Cole sighed a heavy sigh and placed a hand on the defeated knight soldier. You can't quit now. You're stuck in the mud, sure, but maybe not forever. Cole's meal arrived and he ate his dinner in silence next to the pitiful man he'd just met. When Cole finished, he paid for the meal with his remaining dumas and rose from the bar. He gave the knight a final glance. Hiram sat lost in his own head, ale still bubbling in his mug. ... We switch to the royal throne room. The heiress, a day earlier. That's enough visitors for today, King Aaron mentioned offhand to an advisor. His brow was furrowed, his mind lost in thought. The king snapped out of his meditations with a command. Bring my daughter, King Aaron sighed. We have much to discuss, it seems. The guard at the door saluted and ran off to complete his new task. Everyone out, the king commanded. He sat and waited, thrumming his fingers against the arms of his throne. After a number of minutes, the guard returned. Trailing behind him was Sarah. She entered the throne room, much calmer now, but she radiated displeasure still. When Sarah was within speaking distance of her father, she wasted no time. Demand your due. The tribunal cast me out as every day more of your men die in a war you should have won months ago. You can't lead an army from that throne, and you certainly can't win this war. I want my army back. So you can raise more towns on your march to the Safan Seal. You stand before me, accused of war crimes, and demand an army. Do you have another option? The king scowled. Without me, our kingdom will fail and splinter, and history will remember you as the man who failed to save it. And with you at the head of the army, innocents will die. That is a small price to pay for a unified Altheria. And how do you suppose the tribunal merely abandons their investigation? That army is my birthright, and to lead just as this throne is. Return to me what is mine, and I will end this war. Tribunal be damned. Sarah stood in quiet thought, and then an idea crossed her mind. Hiram has served us remarkably all of these years. It would be unfortunate, but he could be held responsible. Sarah, I don't like this. You don't have to, Father. It's a regrettable choice, but it's the best choice. Sarah, we are taking a great risk. The king hesitated for an instant, the gravity of the situation weighing on him. Then he acted. Guard! King Aaron shouted. A guard ran in and stood at attention. Find the commandant, the king asked. The guard nodded and ran off to search for Hiram. The king sighed and turned his sights back to his daughter. The war does not fare well, it is true, the king said almost to himself. The farmers talk of famine and the scholars mourn the dead students, he mused. We will tell no one of this day. After a moment, Hiram entered. He reached the foot of the throne and knelt. Rise, Hiram, the king said tiredly. Hiram turned to look at Sarah. Heiress Sarah? What's going on? The royal commandant inquired. My daughter, the king paused, has informed me of grave news. She told me you ordered the destruction of Ilana. Hiram looked forward, his face like stone. He stared at Sarah. I don't understand. Sarah, tell him I had nothing to do with that. That neither of us had nothing to... Realization dawned on Hiram's face, and he understood. Oh no. I won't lie to you, Hiram. You violated wartime law, and it's out of my control to stop the consequences. Hiram said nothing, understanding welling in his eyes. The king cut in. Hiram, you will be brought before the tribunal to undergo investigation. Hiram, you are relieved of duty immediately. Please remove your helm and your weapon. Ever the soldier, Hiram did as he was ordered. With a loud clang, his weapon struck the stone floor. He removed his commandant's helm next. His eyes bored into the king with hurt and anger. Leave us. With one last silent, injured glance, Hiram walked past Sarah and out of the throne room. King Iron turned his attention to his daughter. Kneel, the king ordered. Sarah lowered herself and cast her eyes down. Sarah, heiress to the throne of Hafera, I grant you command of the royal corps. Your first assignment, make contact with our forces west of Ilana and assume command there. When the king had finished, Sarah looked to her father. His eyes betrayed his many worries about the sundered kingdom, the unending war, about his daughter. His shoulders slumped low. Sarah's face drew a sharp smile as she savoured her victory, and she revelled in the many to come. The Faithful Knight. As Hiram left the throne room, his breathing boomed in his ears like a waterfall. His feet carried him out of the castle and into the square. He stood there for a moment, numb as townsfolk went about their afternoons. Hiram's eyes stared off into the distance as if trying to escape his skull, and then his legs began to carry him to the only place left for the accused, disgraced Hiram to go. The chapel. Hiram reached the chapel, still in a haze, and stood outside, his head heavy. Hiram stood in front of the chapel, his mind swirling. Go in. Hiram's jaw clenched as he entered the chapel doors. Inside, all was quiet. The bustle of the city could not breach its walls. Hiram sat in one of the front pews. He sat and stared at the floor for what felt like an eternity. Then something began to well up in him. Sorrow. Tears began to run down Hiram's face. Hiram couldn't stop them. He couldn't control anything anymore. His shoulders shook. A life of battle and scars had been stolen from under him, and he realized that all his blood and service had meant little to the masters he served. Suddenly, Hiram became overtaken with weariness. Weariness born of years of war, dead comrades, and a bloody sword, all in the name of king and kingdom who had cast him aside. The chapel seemed to close in on him as if to pass judgment. Hiram rose quickly from his pew and walked out of the church. He needed another healer. Hiram began to walk in the direction of the nearest tavern. Well, I think we kind of all saw that coming, but as all the best films, the journey is half of the experience. I enjoyed that. There weren't a massive amount of decisions. There was a few typos, but I really like the storytelling. I really like the intertwined stories. I love intertwined stories of characters. It's a kind of trick and a trope that I really like. We saw there was a few things there where the text kind of overlaps into an instruction and you get like missing quotes and things, which is a bit weird. Maybe that's the ink thing. I've not really used it before, hard to say. But otherwise, very, very good. I enjoyed that. It'd be interesting to try other paths and see what happens. I kind of took a path I could see coming. I could have gone a little bit more at odds with things and also seen. So if you try Grievance by Will, then let me know where you get to. Would love to know. If you are interested in finding that for yourself, then head on over to whill.itch, that's itch.io, and it is pay what you feel. I will be back next week for the solo adventure with a tool, and I am going to be looking at the Homebrewery, quite a well-known kind of markdown editor for creating homebrew D&D 5th edition content. So I'm going to look forward to that one because I have quite a few bits of content I want to make. If you enjoyed this stream and you want to watch more, and you can also watch more of my other streams, mostly around technology and a few other things, then head on over to christianschilder.com or wherever you watch this. You can subscribe, leave a comment, say hi, and I will see you all again next week. And until then, thank you very much for joining me, everybody. Take care.